Hi and welcome to NewsReal, usually with Joe and Neil, but this week I'm joined by Pierre.
Hello.
Pierre is joining us this week because we're going to be discussing the Yellow Vest movement in France. Pierre is French. Oui?
Indeed.
Indeed. So he seems like the right person to be asking about what's going on in France. So we're going to be getting into the background. I think we've a lot of questions, like the key one I have is what can explain, the persistency of this. It's now 4 months. It's been mid-November, so that's 4 months. We're into month 4 now. Yesterday just saw Act 12.
Yeah.
So the
12 weeks.
12 weekends in a row of major protests. Again, they took place right across France and not just in Paris. We've made a little video, actually. I'm going to get ask Scotty if he will play this now. This is a kind of a mashup of stuff that happened around France yesterday during the protests. This is the main venue in Paris where it took place. Do you know the name of that place?
Yeah, it's between Bastille Nation.
Place de la République.
Bastille Nation République, between those three places. It's interesting because those three places, it's not the power center of Paris, It's far away from the houses of the banksters, the CEOs, the senators, the ministers. So the people, the plebeians are kept away from the
I just want to point out
center
here,
of power.
the burning EU flag here.
Yeah, very good idea.
And there's a second incident of burning the EU flag. This, I was told, people who uploaded this video say it's protesters fighting among themselves because they were Antifa.
It is not true. These are Antifas fighting against Yellow Vests.
Yeah.
Which are two very different movements.
And as usual, the police just moved in and tried to break up the protest. This is still in Paris, the same as before. They just blanket the whole area with tear gas and then start firing at head height at protesters.
Yes.
And moving in and just picking off people, attacking them. These are all declared protests now. I mean,
yes.
The Yellow Vests have been told they have to, and so they have. So they announce where they're going to be. They have the right papers to be at that place for a certain period of time. Nevertheless, the police show up, and they instigate the violence, essentially.
The thing is, now they declare the demonstrations, they are more easily cornered. The police know where they're going to catch them.
Exactly, yeah.
And you see, declaring the demonstration doesn't reduce the police violence.
On the contrary, maybe. They know where they're going to be.
Exactly.
This is a guy, another person shot in the face. Another hit in the eye. These are some of the other protests sweeping around the country.
Yeah.
Some big cities, but also small towns.
Strasbourg, and I think it's in front of the Palace of Europe. Palais de l'Europe. Symbolic place.
Where's Morlaix?
Morlaix, north.
In the north. This is also in the north. This is Lille. And finally, this is Saint-Quentin.
Yeah.
Where the protesters were joined, if you like, by firemen who were they're supporting the protesters, obviously. So it's not all, certainly by no means all officials of the state against the protesters. I mean,
absolutely, because a lot of pictures are selected by the mainstream media, recorded by the mainstream media, who purposefully choose images of violence in order to frighten the French people not to go in the streets,
right,
and to make them believe that the police is against them. But in the vast majority of cases, the police show signs of solidarity with the demonstrators,
Right.
because ultimately they share the same claims, they share the same social despair. They have low wages, they work hard, they see the unfair distribution of wealth, and they see the destruction of the nation, their culture.
So when I ask you then, who are the Gilets jaunes? Can you explain to people?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
who they are,
very
because-
quite clear. That's a general picture. There are always exceptions. But what one can say that the yellow vest, in the vast majority, are people, French people, who were working, retirees, and who struggle to survive, despite being productive agents in the countries. Okay, and so that's the social or economical side of it. Now there is also an identity cultural, the nationalist side. Mostly you see white people, white French natives in the ranks of the yellow vest, because in addition to the social economic claims, there is a claim relating to the nation, the identity.
Right.
Okay, and that's the profile, typical profile of your yellow vest. Now there is also a geographic or demographic specifics.
Right.
Most yellow vests do not live in cities. Why? Because globalization led to emergence of what we call the city worlds, like Paris, where are concentrated wealth and power.
Yeah.
Now, as a yellow vest, with your modest wage or your modest retirement pension, you cannot afford living in big cities like Paris, also Marseille or Toulouse. Those places, as people say, have been gentrified.
Right.
These are places exclusively reserved for the bourgeoisie. All right? So the popular classes, the working classes that traditionally were working and living in cities, because the production tools, the factories were in cities, had to leave to the suburbs, to the peripheral of France. But in turn, years later, they had to leave the suburbs because the suburbs were given to migrant populations who became the workers for the factories in urban areas. So today, most of those white, working, poor French demonstrators live not in Paris, where they demonstrate because the power is there, because the media are there, but they live in what is called peripheral France, the France that is abandoned by the media, abandoned by the public power that doesn't invest there, abandoned by the politicians that don't talk much about peripheral France. For a long time, the official narrative that the problems, the social fracture was between the elites and the suburbs.
Right.
So the suburbs was flooded with plans, education plans and funding infrastructures, while the peripheral France was forgotten and dying.
Okay, and so this would be a process over decades. You're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of coming to a head now. It's not like, this is like a recent. Obviously, for example, the spark that set off the protest movement was specifically the raising of taxes on fuel for transport. Obviously, people's cars. But also there were other factors as well. But they were primarily economic. So
no, I don't think so.
No.
But let's go back to the first point: taxes. Taxes on fuel. First, it illustrates the previous point about demographics and geography. Most people from the peripheral France, most people from the working class, basically, have to drive in order to go to their job. Why? Because they've been chased away from the cities by the gentrification. They've been chased from the suburbs by the mass migration waves. So they have to drive a lot. So they're the one who have to pay to work. They're the one who are affected deeply by those taxes. Plus, those taxes are very unfair. Unfair because everybody, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, you have to pay the same amount of tax.
Mm-hmm.
Except when you're rich, if you travel with a private jet, you fill the tank with kerosene. And kerosene is free of tax.
Okay.
But when you're poor, you fill your tank with diesel, and in diesel, 80% of the price is taxes. In France, compared to the US, for example, in France, 1 liter of diesel is €1.5, which is about $1.6, $1.7. For a gallon, it means about $6 a gallon. Or 7.
Yeah. And there's a lot more related to that. I mean, this week, the government announced that there would be increases. I don't know if it's the government announcing this. The newspapers announced that, obviously, I suppose, on behalf of the private companies that now run France's highways, that they would be increasing the toll fees on the motorways across France.
Well, that's the old... it's part of a more systematic process where basically you privatize profits and you nationalize debts. The French highway system was the most efficient one in the world. Built by the state, initiated by de Gaulle, part of the great program of national infrastructure to improve the efficiency of the country. So it's us, French taxpayers, French workers, that paid for this program. And once the program was developed, once the investment phase was done, it was sold for cheap to big private companies to reap the profits. And now they unilaterally increasing the fares, and the Yellow Vests are totally aware of that. The media don't talk so much about that, but it totally burned to the ground 2 toll stations. One near Bandol, another one near Montpellier, I think.
And in addition, there were many that were occupied.
Yeah.
And still are being on some weekends. I should add that in this media report, French media report, I saw announcing increases in the tolls to travel. They had a side story right next to it, letting people know that the profits of the companies running the highways now have never been better. They're at record levels. So the financial health of the companies is superb, we are telling you, and you're going to pay more.
Yeah, it's a good summary of the situation and the economic causes for the current Yellow Vest movement. Not only you have a working class that is working more and more and making less and less money and paying more and more taxes, but at the same time you have the fringe minority that benefits from globalization. And there are some people who benefit from globalization that are mostly living in cities and who keep seeing their revenues increasing. You see? So the wealth inequality keeps increasing.
Yeah, this is the basic point I'm getting from discussions we've had before now and now also. It strikes me that when it comes to looking at the basic indicators of how healthy or not an economy is, the figures are whatever it is, GDP growth per year or the unemployment rate or increases or not in salaries. They are an aggregated national figure.
Yes.
But the key issue that's being overlooked is that there's differential,
Of course.
what incredible difference within any given country. So there can be indeed low inflation on the whole, but look closer and it's not the same story at all.
Of course, and psychology papers show that what is most important for people is not so much their absolute revenue, it's how much they make compared to others, and this feeling of fairness. Now, to go back to GDP or GDP per capita, it doesn't tell you much about individual situation of people. And that's what matters in the end.
Yeah.
A country, the revenue of a country doesn't mean anything on a human level. Say the French GDP, about 1,500 billion. Imagine I get all the money. You know, I'm a kind of dictator, I get all the money. And the rest of the population, 65 million, gets zero.
Yeah.
Is French rich? Is French poor?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Even GDP per capita, that is about 40,000 euros in France in 2018, it doesn't mean anything. It's an average. You need a variance to see how the top tier, the bottom tier, how this revenue is spread.
Yeah. Even when you look at it in aggregate, I saw a figure recently. It was a chart, like a graph, showing that OECD nations, so I think that's largely Western nations, even in aggregate, the real wages, adjusted for price inflation and other things, has been decreasing for everyone since the 1970s.
Not exactly.
Except for one percentile.
Exactly.
A tiny one at the very top. Well, this isn't even the 1%. This is like the 0.05.
Yeah. It is true. Here you're saying your purchase power depends on two factors. How much money you make, your wage, for example, and what's the price of the goods you purchase. If your wage increase 5% a year, meanwhile there's high inflation and the products you buy increase by 10%, your purchase power drops 10 minus 5 equals 5, drops 5% a year. Okay? So indeed, for the popular classes and middle classes in OECD countries, what we call the PPP, or inflation-adjusted purchase power, GDP, is decreasing. And that's a manipulation, one more manipulation, what some economists who are finally the bitch of the system try to make you believe that because your wage is increasing maybe 1% a year, you're getting richer.
Right. Did you just say economists who are the bitch of the system?
Yes.
Okay. Just to clarify that.
Yes,
they are indeed, because they're selling like an incredible story that has little bearing on reality for most people, what you call the popular classes in France.
But they are right. I mean, I understand their behavior. It should be a mistake to think that only 0.1 or 1% of the population in France benefits from globalization.
Okay.
About 20% of the individuals who voted for Macron, in their majority, benefited from globalization. Those people who live in city, who are lawyers, consultants, works in the service industry, bankers, they do benefit from globalization. Their income does increase.
Right.
Their quality of life does increase. They're not stupid.
Yeah.
So those journalists, those so-called experts, those so-called philosophers do defend their privileges.
Okay.
And then their behavior and lies from this perspective is understandable.
Right. Okay. 20% is an interesting figure because that's roughly what even mainstream polls in France are saying is the division of support for or against the yellow vest, 80 to 20%. It's going up and down a little, and it depends on the poll, of course. Yeah. But that's their own polls, which is... We've seen in the past, in other situations, the polls would nearly always try to scientifically adjust them, in quotes, to obviously show a favorable result for the establishment. But even their own polls have this kind of 80-20 split.
And that's the hallmark of the neoliberal driven or the liberal globalization, where you have about 4 out of 5 that loses in the game, and 1 in 5 that wins.
Yeah.
So there is a concentration. It's almost mechanical, it's structural, a concentration of wealth and privileges in the hand of the top 20%. But within this top 20%, indeed, you have 19 point something laches, they're called the bitches of the system, and you have the ultimate winners, which can see their wealth growing by 3-figure percentages each year,
Right.
billions and billions more.
Okay. So this would account for, last week we saw the emergence of really the first counter-protests being called les foulards rouges, which translate to the red scarves. They donned red scarves. Now, officially they got on the streets and they protested. They said that they were there to defend the Republic. They were for democracy and they were against the violence specifically directed at police, they said. But this is probably, given what you've just said, this is probably a kind of a rationale they've come up with where really what they're out there doing is defending their privileges.
Yeah.
Because they don't see that other world. They don't experience, they don't have any tangible connection with the world where they're suffering like most people.
Those same people totally agree with violence against Trump, Putin, Gaddafi, Bashar al-Assad. So violence is not what matters here. It's what does violence serve. If it serves a cause that seems fair to them, topping Bashar al-Assad, killing the evil dictator, so-called evil dictator in Libya, bashing Trump or Putin, that's okay. That's justified. But violence against what they call the police, the Republic, and actually most of the violence is the Republic against the people, but whatever, they don't accept this violence because this violence do not serve their interests.
Right. What do you think of the idea I read put forward by a British journalist but resident in France and observing and reporting on the protests in, especially around late November and early December, the kind of Act 3 and Act 4 stage? This was the point where the craziest scenes from Paris were on the Place de l'Étoile with the Arc de Triomphe, and just incredible pitched battles between the Yellow Vest protesters and the police. He reported, this guy, that several thousand of the protesters were just out there smashing things up, essentially. They were the most militant in pushing back against the police. His comment on it was that what we were looking at here was way beyond a protest against fuel and tax hikes, but that it was an insurrection. He described what he saw as an insurrection. He's also said that he overheard, or maybe he also spoke with, a number of these people who said explicitly that they were up from the country going to Paris to do what they did. Now, I'm bringing it up because I think it supports the premise that this is essentially a urban versus peripheral France, a standoff. Now, he was trying to, or he would have had in his mind that he didn't like what he saw, and this was just violent, and he would have been therefore against whatever reasons these people had for doing it.
The violence is everywhere. First, we have to emphasize that a lot of violence attributed to the Yellow Vests is actually initiated by the black blocs in the Antifa, extreme left, that actually are useful idiots in the hands of Macron and the oligarchy, because they destroy, they attack police forces, and they give an excuse to the police forces to attack, in turn, the demonstrators. So most violence should be attributed to where it belongs, the black blocs, who never get arrested or rarely get arrested. Now, some people, Yellow Vest, get violent, Violence is part of the human nature. Anger is part of the human nature. When you work for years, a lot, and you have barely enough to feed your kids, to give decent housing to your kids, after a while you get angry, especially when you see where the fruit of your labor goes, amongst other places in Paris.
Yeah. One of the slogans that they use a lot is "On ne lâche rien."
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I think it literally means we don't drop anything. We won't back down. We won't back down, and I think it conveys something deeper, is that the feeling, the sentiment of despair and anger is so strong in a lot of, in some yellow vests, that they're ready to go
All the way.
all the way. Why? Because there's nothing to lose. You have some of those people, they work. They are homeless. They work. They have to, on the 15th of the month, they don't have money to buy food.
Yeah.
What do they have to lose?
Yeah. That reminds me of another early slogan in the initial acts of the movement, where they said Macron's talking about the end of the world in reference to global warming and a disaster scenario. And if we don't do something to save the planet now, we're all doomed at some point in the distant future. And their counterpoint was, you're talking about the end of the world. We can't get to the end of the month.
Exactly.
Even employed people, even people who are together with their salary do have some other support from the state. But there are all these hidden taxes compounding, and hidden, by hidden I mean they're not actual like taxes taken out of a paycheck, but they're taxes or charges placed on compulsory stages, compulsory things they must do, compulsory things they must buy. The clearest example of which is the yellow vest itself, which is a remarkable symbol. The yellow vest, of course, was by law decreed under the Sarkozy government that every vehicle in France must have a yellow vest for emergencies. So you would think, okay, everyone has to have one. Well, maybe I'm going to be sent one from the local authority. No, everyone had to purchase one themselves.
Yeah.
That's one small charge, but there are 1,000 charges, and they increase all the time.
Yes, and we finally reached the straw that broke the camel back.
Right.
This tax on fuel. But invoking global warming in the end of the world is a scam. It is a double scam on a social, economic level and on societal level. Because in the narrative of the elites is what justifies raising the taxes on diesel, you see? These are the plebeians who pollute and destroy the planet with their evil diesel. That's what the elites say while traveling in private jets that are thousands of times more polluting. That's what the same oligarchs say while living in lavish villas that destroy way more the planet and consume the resources. The yellow vest who lives on 700 euros a month and has a barbecue maybe in the weekend in this backyard, if he has a backyard, he's not the one who polluting. He's not rich enough to pollute.
Yeah.
You know? So that's a scam on an economic level, this global warming. But it's also a scam, also societal on a demographics level, because it justifies, allegedly, the mass inflow of migrants. And those two topics, identity, migration, and economics are related. The cost of migrants in France every year is about 20 billion euros. Be aware that today in France, if you're a migrant, you have more rights, you have more support, you have more infrastructure, you have more money, you have more help than if you are a homeless, white, native Frenchie.
Yeah.
So, although it's conducted in the name of equality, you know, human rights, we all equal, universalism. Today, the migrants have more rights than the natives. Where's the equality?
Right. Yeah, and this is obviously not touched with a 10-foot barge pole in the French media normally, but there was an interesting situation a few weeks ago where Macron, as part of his grand débat, his national debate, but what's your opinion on this great debate that he's launched, his program to consult the people?
It's a masquerade.
Right.
It's a masquerade. First, he didn't consult the people. He selected mayors that were conciliatory, that were understanding, that were on his side. And then he went for these endless monologues. But it's not binding. It's not a contract. It has no legal value. It's just wind. Just
Right.
make believe that the yellow vests are being heard.
Yeah.
They're not being heard. They was not even there.
Yeah. There was one mayor, though, who spoke out of,
Yeah.
of a mid-sized city, and she basically pointed out what you just said regarding the different treatment by the state between native French and migrants. And basically, she's talking about the level of resources available to newly arrived, they're not yet even citizens, compared with people who are born French. She was, of course, roundly attacked in the media, but it's like, why even bother if everyone knows it? What happened to this national debate you're going to have if, when she gets up to point out what everyone knows, she gets attacked and told to sit down and be quiet?
Yeah, and be careful when you hear so-called representatives of a yellow vest invited in mainstream media. The mainstream media do select, and that sometimes they even create the so-called representatives that hold a very specific discourse. That is the extreme left discourse centered on a class struggle, a Marxist vision of the world. That has some truth, but it's not the whole picture. What is specific in the yellow vest movement is that it meshes together the best of the right and the best of the left. That is, the best of the left, let's call it social justice, social equality, wealth distribution, and the best of the right, let's call it morality values. While Macron embodies the worst of the left and the worst of the right. The worst of the right is the economic right, neoliberalism, growing inequalities, and the worst of the left, that's the LGBT minorities craziness.
The multicultural ideology.
Yeah. The destruction of identity, values, basically. The very nihilist, postmodernist vision of the world and societies.
That compels them to make statements like, there's no such thing as French culture.
Yes, there are cultures in France. Yeah, that's what he said. And that is a lie. That is false. France is one of the oldest countries, oldest nations in Europe, is centuries old, 1,000 years old, and it has a very specific culture that is very much related to Christianism.
Indeed.
That's history. That's reality. Whether you're an atheist or you're a believer. I'm talking about culture and history here. I'm not talking about religion. Mm-hmm. So, and what the power to be, the elites are very afraid of today is a convergence between the extreme left, social wage equality and tax equality, say, and the extreme right, identity, nationalism, control of the borders. They don't want this convergence to happen like it just happened in Italy.
Indeed.
So they try to focus on the less harmful of those two discourses, that is, the extreme left discourses. Reduce our tax, increase our wage, and we shut up. We see if it works. We see.
Yeah. Speaking of Italy, the Italian guy, I think it's interesting that in the space of just 2 or 3 days last week, first the Italian leader of the left party that made it in, Luigi Di Maio, criticized French foreign policy as being a causal factor in the migration waves coming from North Africa. He was specifically, we call it colonization or neocolonialism, the French government's engagement with North Africa. 2 days later, and he was saying this because this is at the root of these migration waves coming up from North Africa across the Mediterranean, affecting obviously Italy as well as France. 2 days later, Luigi Di Maio criticized him from, the other guy who's the interior minister in Italy, the leader of the right party that formed a government, Di Matteo.
Yeah, La Liga.
Criticized Macron's government from the right. Obviously, it's the multicultural embrace of the migrant waves that they're also causing. So one attacked the cause and one attacked this crazy solution to the issue that's destroying identity and economy.
Of course, it goes in the end at some level, at the financial level. You have the same representative of the elites that support wars in countries like Syria, Libya, which trigger massive flows of migrants. Those same elites welcome and want those migrants, which in turn manage to drive the wages down. More potential workers, more demand, same supply, wages go down.
Yeah.
You know, it goes in the end. And
we're talking now about relatively recent migrant waves, obviously from the Syrian war, the Libyan war. But you made a reference earlier to migration waves, explaining over the last 40, 50 years how the map of France has changed. Do you make a distinction between the two, or can you link these two things together?
In France, first, France has a long history of successful integrated migration. It started in 1860.
Okay.
And since then, you have had migrations non-stop. It changed it a bit. In 1945, France had to be rebuilt. A lot of people died. So France needed workforce. And a lot of young, single males from North Africa, colonies, came to France to work, to rebuild the country.
So that was government policy to attract them.
And it's called a labor migration.
Yep.
It's for labor the migration occurs. Those young male, what did they do? They worked in France. They met French native women. They got kids. They become French. They became more French than French themselves.
Okay.
Because they know the price of becoming member of a nation, citizen of a nation. They know what it means because they had to earn it. Now, in the 70s, the law changed, and there was this family grouping that came into action that was applied, and it was not single males that were migrating. These were all families, and the number started to increase. It means it's way more difficult to integrate a family that doesn't have to interact much with the rest of society than to integrate a single working individual.
Yeah.
And then there was the still increase of figures during the past years and the focus, concentration of this population in suburbs, which was terrible for the natives because historically that's where the working class were living, and they loved those places. And it was terrible for integration because it's more difficult to integrate foreign populations that when they are concentrated in the same place. There's not many interactions with the natives, the culture, the language, the history.
They will naturally move to areas and therefore be closely related through employment, through shared cultural backgrounds, etc. They'll move to areas where there are people like me.
What do you mean?
Well, the people arriving, if they're arriving in larger number, like as a family unit, they're going to stick together.
Yeah.
If there's a familiar family unit like them, they will of course stay together still, and so on, and it attracts more people. This has been shown in countless studies that people, no matter who they are, even white people in New York, in the classically liberal Democrat voting parts of the city, they'll have their reasons for why they move, that they will never want to be seen as racist, of course, right? But they will move if there's a certain tipping point where there's not enough people like me in my area. And so people's, whether they're native or newly arrived or a couple of generations old in their new host country and now consider themselves a citizen of that country, they will naturally start to divide themselves into places where they're with like people, whether it's of the same background, racially, religiously, etc.
Yeah, I don't think we have necessarily to invoke racism to explain those behaviors. Those natives who left the suburbs like the suburbs. That's where they were born. That's where their memories. But when you hear testimonies from those people, they say that it doesn't feel like France anymore. It doesn't feel like I'm living in France anymore. And so it's not a value judgment. It's not that it's better or it's worse, but it's just not who they are. So they moved to peripheral France, to the countryside, to the small towns, to the forgotten and neglected France.
Yeah. I'm afraid that
And maybe one point, sorry to interrupt you, one point there is a myth that in the suburbs there's no economic future. That is not true. I mean, that is not true. That is less true than it is for peripheral France. In the suburbs, you're close to the power, you're close to the money. There are jobs when you're in the suburbs because you're close to the cities. So there's, to some extent, there's a potential for social climbing up the social ladder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You don't have that in peripheral France. So, sure, there are no-go zones in French suburbs around big cities. I witnessed that directly. There are no-go zones. There are areas that are controlled by some kind of Northern African mafia,
Mm-hmm.
where most of the economy is based off illegal drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the suburbs is not that. Most of the suburbs is typically the Northern Africa young guy who works for Amazon and does the delivery. Hard job, difficult job, working all day long.
Yeah. You were in Paris recently, and you said you were struck by how well the city is doing, in the parts that you saw anyway.
Paris is called the most beautiful city in the world. Is it only French people who say that? Maybe it's chauvinistic, no?
I think that's certainly like what historically it's been associated with. Yeah. Okay, we'll give you that.
There might be some objective reasons for that, and one objective reason is because indeed it is very beautiful. And to make a beautiful city, I mean, it doesn't pop out from the ground spontaneously. It means there's been generation, wealth, ideas, work to create those marvels. France is a very centralized country, and Paris does concentrate about 1/3 of the population. Most of the population in the suburbs. You have 1 or 2 million people living in Paris. That's not much, huh? The very privileged. Yeah. The bobo. Bourgeois bohème, you know, the one, they drink smoothie, they eat vegetarian, they moved on electric, and you see them, the result on them, you know, they don't do much, they don't eat real meat, they do real activities, so the small wrist, and they're all around and a bit flabby, you know.
Yes.
These are the Parisians. And around them, there is a kind of the servers, you know, the one who bring the food at home, the sushi, and the smoothies. They live in the suburbs. And so you have a small population there.
Yeah.
2 million in Paris, 15 million in suburb, 1/3 of the population in urban Paris, the one who make Paris work, who run Paris, the workforce. And but you have half the wealth who is generated and consumed in Paris.
Yeah.
Very strong concentration of wealth.
And it includes a lot of social investment.
Of course.
But it's target areas, right? So it's not just that it's certain cities, but certain parts of the cities.
Of course.
The streets look fabulous. The people are doing well. Everyone's happy. So there's a reality to it. It's not all a mirage, but the mirage, it does become a mirage when it's looked at the national level.
It's a reality, and you have basically, in terms of globalization in a developed country, about 20% who get wealthier on the back at the expense of 80%. This is very unfair, but it leads to beautiful results, i.e. the concentration of wealth and therefore beautiful architecture in cities. It is a reality.
Yeah. I think it's
Just one point. We have to emphasize that during gentrification, there is a concentration of public funds in cities. Because let's think about it. Now there's a budget, I don't know, for swimming pools. Will we get a swimming pool here? Here, for the listeners of viewers, we live in southwest in the middle of nowhere. We won't get anything. The only thing I got is a nuclear plant, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So if it explodes, we die. That's our only privilege. If there are budgets for swimming pools, who is going to decide? Senators?
Right.
Congressmen? Where do they live? Do they live here?
No.
Do you know a senator lives here? Yeah, or ministers. They live... all the political power, economic power, financial power is media power. Everything in Paris. That's why the Yellow Vest demonstrate in Paris. Because the message is for those people, for those elites. And when those elites meet with each other in those beautiful salons, they put money for the project that serve their interests. And the suburbs, so they stop burning cars.
Right. Sometime in December, there were various Yellow Vest protests that took place in other countries. I'm thinking specifically of those in the Anglo-Saxon world. Now, they were partly in sympathy with the French protesters, but I noticed a statement from the organizer of one that took place in Canada. And in his interview with Canadian media, he made a point of distancing himself and therefore the cause for why they were protesting from the French by saying, well, no, our reasons for doing this are different. Over there, they're too socialistic. Here, our concern is the destruction of our industry. Most of these people were from, they were families of people who work in Canada's oil industry. So in the heartland, the interior provinces of Canada. That was one issue, the destruction of our national industry, a key one to us. And the other one was mass migration. Yeah. Somehow in the translation of what was going on in France, to his mind, what he was picking up, he had been told that this is the two core issues in France were not the same as in Canada, but they essentially are.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the same core problem. Let's call it globalization on a cultural level and on an economic level. And the consequences in all the countries are similar, depending on the national context, national history. But you're going to have a destruction of public services, if there is any. So maybe it's already been destroyed. You're going to have a growing disbalance in wealth distribution. And you're going to have the rise of the multicultural paradigm, mass migration and destruction of national tradition, national identity. In Canada, maybe there's not so much public service, or I don't know, maybe the disindustrialization is still going on in Canada. In France, it's already done. They destroyed all the industries. But disindustrialization is one of the hallmarks of globalization.
Right.
Globalization, open the borders, no more protection. You transfer, shareholders, cosmopolite individuals, 0.1%, decide to relocate industries, factories where it's the cheapest because they're tens of millions, obviously not enough. And they want more, and always more, and more greed.
Right.
And more suffering for the people who see their industries disappearing, or see their social benefits disappearing, or see their identity disappearing, the district where they were living disappearing.
Yeah. That was actually one of the things on the... There have been various lists of demands that the Yellow Vests made, but one that was being shared around specifically said the reintroduction of manufacturing in France. This was alluding to the fact that globalization has created a kind of major emphasis on servicing jobs across the West, where in the extreme case in the United States, 85% of all employment is in services industries.
Well, it's not so. It's 85% of total labor. So this 85% is relative and has to be explained in light of the collapse of industrial jobs.
Yeah.
So both phenomenon happen concomitantly. Destruction of industry, which is not really a destruction, it is transfer, geographical transfer to countries where workforce is cheaper. Southeast Asia, Latin America, basically. And at the same time, an increase in services that is very much related to the rise of this bourgeoisie class in the cities that benefit from globalization, that benefit from moving the factories away,
To
increase their resources, and consume what? Those kind of services. In the morning, yoga class. In the afternoon, going to Pilates or getting a massage.
Yeah.
You know, Asian style massage with hot stones, and then going to a vegetarian restaurant, and you see this kind of cultural leisures,
Yeah.
of entertainment. You know, the Netflix, the home food.
And so they're working on the backs of the largest sections of most French people, and in addition, the people manufacturing things, extracting things in foreign countries. So there's yellow vests in France, but the yellow vests are joined then, so to speak, by the people in the other parts of the world where the industry has been moved to. They're all working to essentially serve a few cities.
Yeah.
In France and then across the Western world. The term you used before was world cities.
Yeah.
So these, yeah, I've heard this term used before. Many places. I mean, it's been discussed up the wazoo in academia that this is the outcome of globalization. It's been deliberately encouraged, of course. There was one context in which I heard that, in hindsight, stands out to me. When Trump was elected, there was a high-profile British journalist, a columnist for The Guardian, who went out of his way to say what the Trump election was not. And he basically described what you've just said, that this is not a clash of people in the rural periphery against those in the cities, the cosmopolitan elite. It was a strange way because he introduced to me or reminded me of this very concept while telling me that this is not what you are seeing. He was protesting too much.
Yeah, protesting too much. The ones who voted and who support Trump in the US are the yellow vests.
Right.
It's very similar socially, in societal terms as well. Now, a mistake is to use the Marxist analysis, and which tricked us many times by opposing artificially the small businessmen, small business owners, independent workers against blue collars. And what you see, and the bourgeoisie is very afraid of this alliance between the small business owners, artisan, independent workers, and blue collars. Because together, this is the working class, the true working class. And today, the yellow vests are embodying this alliance. The artisan, you know, the plumber who lives in a small town in superior France, the blue collar who lives in one of the few industries that are left, they're socially the same. They're socially facing the same condition,
Right.
the same oppression, shall we say, or at least injustice.
Yeah. It strikes me that the reason for the yellow vest movement at all is because this, more or less, this unification of views, this recognition among people has taken place.
Yeah. There's those yellow vests have transcended several artificially made separation. They've transcended the horrific and so destructive illusion of right versus left
Right.
by taking the best of the right values and best of the left work and distribution of wealth. And that transcended another artificial duality, this boss versus worker. And recognize the problem is not the boss. 80% of the boss in France have boss of SMEs. They're independent workers. They don't make much money. They face a lot of uncertainty. They pay a lot of taxes. The problem is the big bosses, big banks, multinational companies. They're the one who pay no taxes. The small independent workers, they pay so much taxes, it's insane. And that's why most of them go belly up.
Right. And this is hence the duration and the persistency of both the state in its crackdown on the protests and the protesters in getting out week after week in a harsh, fairly harsh and miserable winter to protest.
Yeah.
It's and so would it be fair to say it's formed or revealed the real division, the real opposition?
Yeah. First, let's say that the Republic is doing what it does very well, defending the privileges of whom it stands for.
Yeah.
Okay. The Republic is very bad at developing a country, or defending a nation, of protecting a people. They're very good at defending the privilege of the small clique that make the Republic. Okay, so they're doing that now, and they're very good at that.
Yeah,
because they're motivated.
Yeah,
and the way they do it, as usual, is lies and violence. Lies, demonizing the movement, the Yellow Vest, stupid, redneck, racist, anti-Semitic, lazy, violent. Did I say that? Maybe. The demonizing through the media that are just one department of the oligarchy.
Mm-hmm.
They're all in Paris, they're all in cities, they have way above average revenues and they benefit from globalization. And so lying and violence.
Mm-hmm.
Violence through the police.
Yeah.
The police that is really between two stools. The police that is paid by elite,
Mm-hmm.
and they know that, and they want to keep their job. They don't make a lot of money to feed the kids. And at the same time, they hear the orders. They hear that they have to beat those people who are their friends, who are the same as them.
Mm-hmm.
Miserable wage, struggling to reach the end of the month, struggling to feed the kids. So that's really a dilemma.
So when Macron is saying we must defend the institutions from the attacks by these militants, that's more or less a direct quote. In a sense, he is telling the truth.
Yeah. Yes,
the
true.
caveat being we must defend the institutions which we have captured from the popular classes, from the people.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell. He's hoping in saying that people will rally to his side, but all he's going to rally are from among those 20% who recognize what he's saying. Because yes, whether they realize or not, yes, we must defend the institution because we have captured them. They work in our favor.
Since the inception of the Republic, since the French Revolution depicted as spontaneous revolution is a transfer of privilege from one class, nobility, clergy, to another class, a rising bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
That still holds these privileges, still hold this power today. And they don't want to drop it. And I understand that.
Isn't it? It's remarkable that the French Revolution, in essence, or correct me if I'm wrong, in essence, was about overthrowing a corrupt bourgeoisie / aristocracy elite and making a more egalitarian form of society. And we have come all the way around to a situation where, despite all of the, well, by now, the dogmas of the way France is set up, institution-wise, its laws, is in the name of preventing exactly that situation. Nevertheless, that situation has re-emerged in reality, although not in words.
Yeah, no, I understand what you say, and we could apply it to the current violence. The bourgeoisie that currently holds the power got this power from the revolution. The revolution was a violent act, and they praised this violence.
Mm-hmm.
So when the violence served their interest, they're very much for this violence. When this violence threatened their privileges, they're very much against this violence. But make no mistake, there's an official story for the French Revolution, there's reality. The reality is that it was engineered, it was manufactured, the price of the wheat, which was a trigger factor, was deliberately, consciously manipulated, speculated, high up. They created shortages artificially. They blocked the boats bringing wheat to Paris. They created a starvation, and then they hystericized the starving crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? All that was orchestrated by a bourgeoisie, raising bourgeoisie, that was very much in bed with Jansenism, a unhealthy form of Protestantism, that was very much in bed with some lodges, Freemason lodges, mostly the one in Port-Royal, and this clique that engineered revolution and became the winner of the revolution.
That's mind-bending. So you're saying that it's essentially the France as it functions today was based on a lie.
Yes, but pretty much, you're right. But nonetheless, in the mind of the plebeians, they do believe, most of them, the official narrative.
The rights
they do
of man.
believe that the plebeian can rise for liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a symbol. You know, nations, cultures are built upon lies. We call it myth.
Myths, yeah.
And symbols. And that it is very powerful in the collective unconscious.
Right.
So whether true or wrong on a symbolic level, it doesn't matter so much. Frenchies have been grown, infused with this idea of popular rising. And today, that is one of the fuel that helped the Yellow Vest movement grow and maintain his pace.
Yeah, okay. Among the many things I've seen in terms of articulating what they would like are banners at the head of marches and protests saying we want a new republic. Another, probably the one I see the most, is the initials RIC.
Yeah.
What is the demand?
The demands are quite heterogeneous, de facto, because the Yellow Vest movement is a spontaneous movement. There's no leader. There's not a leader that raised troops and said, let's go there and let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's heterogeneous. That's the strength and the weakness of the movement. That's the strength because a movement with a leader is way more difficult to infiltrate and subvert. There's no head. That's a weakness too because if one day we reach the end of the insurrection phase and the change in power, effective change, the question will be, okay, now we got rid of the old power, where do we go now? And future will tell. You mentioned the RIC, R-I-C.
Yeah.
It means Referendum d'Initiative Citoyenne. Citizen-initiated referendum, something like that. Is the idea that a representative democracy is a scam. Representative democracy is when the people doesn't exert power directly,
Yeah.
Democracy, demos kratos, power to the people. Representative democracy is not a democracy. Representative democracy today in France is you vote, whatever you vote, it doesn't change anymore. It will be a candidate of the system who will be elected, and it will implement a policy for the oligarchy, and you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Whatever you vote, it doesn't work for the people. It works very well for the elite. So people want to circumvent this issue by implementing a direct consultations, referendum. These are people who directly vote for that law, on this law, or that change, or this change.
Yeah.
But we could say that a referendum is a mean, it's on an end. A referendum is a mean to implement a vision, the society, this ideal society of the future you envision. You know? But what the point of voting for this or for that? What the point of turning here right or left if you don't know what you ultimately what you want to go? So if this movement wants to be really constructive, it will have to structure itself.
Form a political party.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not structured at all, because the individuals are structured. And maybe one of the reasons why the Yellow Vest movement is so pregnant here in France and less developed in other countries, I think is because the Frenchies, you know, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. The Frenchies still, despite all, they think for the best and for the worst.
Yeah.
In this case, it's rather for the best. And here we have to give credit or to notice, at least to be aware that in France, the dissidents have had thinkers and opinion leaders. De Soral, Dieudonné, and many others. It's a long list.
Yeah.
People who for years, deep thinkers,
Yeah.
philosophers, experts, who for years have been pointing at the reality of the horror of what some people call the Republic or the democracy. And those people are very popular, those leaders, those opinion leaders, those thinkers are very popular and have educated a whole generation.
Right.
And what is turning, although the level of structuration of the Yellow Vest is almost zero, the level of education, of political awareness of those people is very impressive.
Yes.
They see what is going on.
Yes, and that's despite the same kind of media saturation that misinforms people as anywhere else in the West all these years. That's what struck me about when Macron declared that, okay, now we will begin a great national debate. I was like, I'm sorry, but the horse has already bolted. You don't understand that French people have spent the last, let's say, the whole internet age talking to each other, using the internet, educating themselves. They've already done their homework. That's why they're out on the streets. This is the culmination of the thinking and reflection and the paying attention to what's going on from before. So you're not going to be able to come in with a debate now, a structured debate on anything that they won't agree with you.
Well, he's trying. He has to try.
Yeah.
He has to try. He can try the threats. We put you in jail. There was a Yellow Vest who was sentenced to 4 months in jail for throwing a soft box of pâté on the policeman.
Yeah.
The policeman killed and injured massively. So far, 12 people died. 12 plebeians, French plebeians died during demonstration. 400 suffered severe injuries.
Yeah.
18 lost an eye. About 20 lost a hand. And 4,000 were injured, not severely injured, more lightly. So he's trying the threat, the violence. Mm-hmm. He's trying, okay, let's negotiate. He's trying to give a bit as well. Remember the 40 euros? That was an insult, actually, but it was an attempt to move in the right direction and give a bit, give a bone to chew to the people, 40 euros and this end of the year premium. So there are various, and now the attempt at apparent discussion. I'm going to listen to you. So he's trying to stop this movement.
Do you think it will work, or the combination of threats and the carrot and the stick, as we say in English, will that work, or is the only solution to this basically the essential protesters' demand, either in the form of the RIC or a new kind of assembly? That's one other idea that I heard floated, like a people's assembly.
Yeah, and
ironically, that's exactly what kicked off international condemnation of Venezuela for establishing a new form of assembly in which there will be a lot more direct democracy rather than representative democracy, which is, I think the two issues are related. I think essentially the people in France are demanding what Venezuela's trying to implement in the face of incredible economic difficulties and siege mentality from abroad.
your first question was, is it going to work? Where's it going?
Yeah.
I don't know. What I can say, it depends what you mean by working or success. I would say
a fundamental change in people's ability to redress their grievances and to change either the constitution or laws, or
I would say at some level, in terms of awareness, I think a major step in the right direction has been made. I think the French people have become aware of a lot of what is going on. They read over the past years a lot about this topic.
Yeah.
But now they've seen the proof. Each time Macron police beats someone, they get more proof that we are not in democracy, that the Republic is an illusion, that we live in a ruthless oligarchy that has only contempt for the plebeians. So, in terms of awareness, I think it's already a success, even if it stops today. And this awareness, nothing can remove it.
Yeah.
Now, in more material terms, where is it going to go? I think it's difficult to say. There's so many possibilities.
Yeah.
One possibility, I can give you the possible scenarios. One possibility is a subversion of the movement, particularly by some extreme left leaders. Would that be the bad thing? I'm not sure. That would be less bad than a Macron regime, I think. You can have a sacred union between extreme right leader, extreme left leader. That would be difficult because today in France, Marine Le Pen, extreme right, is controlled by Israel, and Mélenchon, extreme left leader, is a Freemason for high-level Freemason for decades, so he's controlled by the lodges. So those big powers will never allow them to make an alliance, like in Italy.
Yeah.
The people can get tired as well, and frightened, and so much repression, so much time spent demonstrating that
And seeing no
out,
change.
Yeah, no change, that it fizzles out. I think that's really open.
Yeah. You mentioned Italy. I mean, that's one realistic scenario. Sometime during, I mean, Macron's got 3 years left, but there could be some kind of emergency election.
Oh, yeah.
And then the emergence of a kind of coalition like in Italy. Because I'm thinking that something has to yield. In the absence of, like you say, the whole thing petering out somehow.
If it doesn't, you're right, if it doesn't peter out, they're going to throw a bone to the dog, you know. In French we say, when the dog has seen the piece of meat, you throw a bone in the other direction. The dog has seen the meat. That's true. Now, they're going to throw a bone if it doesn't peter out. Throwing a bone, the worst for them will be an alliance between extreme right and extreme left, which is totally in opposition with the globalist ideology. It means a social nationalist regime. That's a word, eh?
Uh-huh.
Sorry about that. I'm not talking about anti-Semitism, about Hitler and all that, but it's that socialism concerning the labor, and nationalism concerning the moral, the identity. Okay, the best of the left, socialism for the work, and best of the right, nationalism, moral, for the society, the model of society, the societal factor. That's the total negation. That's the opposite of the globalism.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what they're going to avoid. what they want to avoid.
Yeah.
So I think they will attempt first an extreme left Mélenchon-like guy, a Marxist, only addressing the social, the labor claims, increase like in 1968.
Yeah.
You increase the wage, you reduce the taxes. Allez, shut up and go back to work. If it doesn't work, they could promote an extreme right, a pro-Zionist extreme right leader, like what they call extreme right, nationalists, national Zionist, like Marine Le Pen. She's not a big threat. So there are many kind of scenarios between from zero compromise, we stick to the Macron ultra-liberal, ultra-globalist agenda to Italian-like sacred union, sacred alliance between the best of the right and best of the left.
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, it's just remarkable to me how persistent this has been. But given the history of globalization and its impact on France that you explained, on the other hand, it's not surprising that sooner or later things were going to come to a head like this. So we shall see, and we'll hopefully discuss this again another time. Thank you, Pierre, for your insights.
Thank you.
We'll leave it there for this week, folks. If you like this show, please like this video and don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, see you next week.
Au revoir.